need a motion for the approval of the MABE annual dues
So moved.
by Dr. Dorsey and seconded by Ms. Battaglia.
Board members, this is the annual dues to belong to MABE. Many of you participate in MABE in various committees and professional development. The fees for this year is no increase from the fees from last year.
Any other comments? All right, I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Now I would like a motion for the approval of Legal Services Association fee
So moved.
by Ms. Savigny and a second by Ms. Battaglia.
Okay, and this item is for the annual dues for MABE's LSA, which provides policy and legal support to local boards as well as free trainings for school-based staff in member counties.
Comments? Okay, I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Now I need a motion for the approval of Old Line Board of Soccer Officials contract
So moved.
by Dr. Dorsey, seconded by Ms. Battaglia.
Board members, this is the annual contract to provide officials for all home soccer games.
Questions? I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Now I would like a motion for the approval of Mid-Atlantic Officials Alliance D/B/A Champion Officials Group contract.
So moved.
And seconded by
I'll second.
Ms. Battaglia. Dr. Locker.
And board members, this is the annual contract for officials for home football games.
Comments? And I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Now I need a motion for the approval of deeds of easement for stormwater management improvements to the Tawny Town ES Northwest Middle School. That meant elementary school.
Yep.
So moved.
By Ms. Battaglia, seconded by
I'll second it.
Dr. Dorsey.
This is for the approval of temporary deeds of easement to support work the county is doing on stormwater management, and the easements have been reviewed by your legal counsel.
Comments? Questions? I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. At this time, I would like a motion for the approval of before and after school childcare leases.
So moved.
So moved by Dr. Dorsey and seconded by
I'll second.
Ms. Savigny. All right.
Okay. Oh, we good? Okay. Yep. So here's an indication of our efforts to return to a little bit more of a normal school year in 21-22. Each August in our typical years, we bring approval of lease agreements for the providers of before and after school childcare leases, and we're prepared to reinstitute that program again this year.
Ms. Battaglia? No, excuse me, Ms. Savigny? Oh, brother. It's only 9:20.
And Dr. Lockhart, so these are fees that are actually paid to the Board of Ed based on the square footage that they use, right?
Correct.
So, okay. This isn't any impact, this is actually a positive to
Correct.
our budget.
Yep.
Right.
Any other comments? Questions? I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. And now, I need a motion for the approval of construction contract for Westminster East Middle School replacement project
So moved.
by Ms. Savigny and seconded by
I'll second it.
Dr. Dorsey. Dr. Locker.
Board members, this is a big moment for the East Middle School replacement as we bring for you the guaranteed maximum price construction contract for the project. You're aware that you've been working throughout the planning and design process with staff and the planning committee, on which board members Kyler and Ms. Battaglia serve. We've also had great support from the commissioners and county staff, as well as the Westminster Council and city staff. The project was bid in April and bids were received in June. We immediately learned that there was some volatility with some construction materials, and along with our construction manager and architects, we've been working through a process to get the contract to a manageable place. I know that each of you has had a chance to meet with staff and review the contract, and we really appreciate that work. Before bringing the contract for your approval, I've asked Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Prokop, and staff to provide a quick presentation for you and the public, and then we can have discussion and action.
Thank you, Dr. Lockard. That was off, wasn't it?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Lockard. And we did want to do a brief presentation, and Mr. Prokop will try to move through that as quickly as possible, but we also want to make sure we satisfy all of your questions and discussion. I just wanted to make a couple of overarching comments, and then we can come back to these at the right time. So, tonight's the culminating moment. It's a pivotal moment because if you're able to approve this tonight, we'll remain on the original construction schedule we've talked about. I wanted to also thank the county staff and the commissioners who invited us over for a brief little update the other day as well. They've been working with us both on the financial part of this, which is now the conversation for tonight, and also at the approval level to make sure we're trying to stay on pace to be able to have the grading permit to start work in October, and we certainly appreciate that. So at the end of Mr. Prokop's presentation, the problem to sort of discuss tonight is where the total project cost is after the bids came in, and a lot of work that's happened since the bids have come in. But sort of the last thing I want to leave you with before Ray presents is, and we shared this with the commissioners, Ms. Herbert joined me in the audience the other day, as you consider approving this contract and recognize the remaining gap in funding, even after a lot of hard work, you do not necessarily have to solve that gap tonight. So, that was a point we stressed with the commissioners, and we wanted to stress now. It's a 2-year project. There'll be plenty of time to consider some of the solutions we're suggesting, and to see how things go with construction. And there may be other solutions you would like us to consider as well. So I just wanted to make that point now. We'll come back to that, and I'll ask Mr. Prokop to present.
And to be succinct. All right. Good evening, board members. Kenny, who's back behind me here, I guess it's a little awkward. I'd like to be on a glacier right now, too. That would be fun. Tonight, we do have the approval of the construction contract for the East Middle School project, and with us tonight, we have Mr. John Pickett representing Dustin Construction, and Mr. Peter Weinbrenner representing our architects for Horde Copeland Mocht, to answer any questions if we need to get into any detail beyond where I or the staff, Bill and Jim, can get into. So let's see, I think I turned it in the right direction. A couple of things to keep in mind as we go through the slides. The first two are that our objectives when we went into this process that I'm going to describe in a little bit, that we wanted to be sure, that's in the, I guess, can the board see the presentation? You can. It's over here. I see it's not back behind me here. But what we wanted to do, our objectives were to make sure we maintain the instructional features of the building, making sure that the vision of the construction planning committee remained intact when all things were said and done, and also make sure that what we viewed, we took into account that the impact, that we wouldn't impact the schedule, so we could maintain our opening in September 2023. And lastly, just to keep in mind that the state funding has been secured, and also for fiscal year 22, that the local funding has also been secured. So from a timeline standpoint, we can actually jump down to bullet 3, I suppose, to keep things moving along. And what you see is that the bids we received in June exceeded the state and local funding that we had in hand. So what we did, that initiated our bringing the architects and our construction manager in to begin the process of trying to identify where the issues existed, how we could go about trying to see how we could bring down that cost somewhat. And one of the things, just as a little bit of background, the CM approach uses bid packages. Under the bid packages, those are usually broken up by trade, HVAC, site work, carpentry, those sorts of things. And there's about 25 packages in this bid. And what we noticed right away that it all boiled down to about 4 packages, in which steel was the biggest issue. What we're seeing out there is that the steel index has increased some 90% over the course of the last year. So our bids are tracking just what the market is telling us. Unfortunately, this is one of those times when we would have preferred an anomaly. We went into that process to identify value engineering items, VE items. I'll probably slide into just saying VE because, well, that's what I do. But we generated some, and mostly, again, it was the staff, Bill and Jim, along with the construction team, generated about 125 VE items. So it's quite a bit in depth. Get into those a little bit later, quickly, nevertheless. We also evaluated our budget. We took a look at funding options that we could present to the board, that we are in control of, that we could make recommendations for. And lastly, we took a look at our ad alternates, which are not included in the bottom line cost. We are recommending, well, I've got an ask about an ad alternate, but at the moment they're not included in the total cost for the project. And I'm going in the wrong direction. So when it comes to VE, the value engineering, I mentioned about 125 value engineering items. Those were anything from a few $1,000s to a few $100,000. Most of, again, nothing is affecting the educational program. Most of the items that we accepted are going to not be noticeable by the staff. The users of the building won't notice them. These are going to be things in the walls, in the ceilings, pipe materials, those sorts of VE items that we decided to accept. There are going to be some things that are noticeable, and these are some of the architectural changes that we had to look into. The rendering on the left is what was approved by the board in March. And what's on the right is where we ended up with, after we started to look at the bid packages that were causing us concern. So the first thing you notice is the area here with the gym and the cafeteria no longer has the steep slope roof. The steep slope, this is now a low slope roof, single ply low slope roof with a material that we feel comfortable will give us a 30-year lifespan, a 20-year warranty. It doesn't give us the lifespan of a steep standing metal seam roof like this. It's a 60-year lifespan, but because of the market conditions, the delta is just too big. We just can't justify that life cycle in this case. And then it compounds with the metal roof. There's structure underneath here going down the entire length of the building that holds up that metal roof. That is all obviously steel. That steel is very heavy. It transfers down the load, down the walls, down the masonry walls, and into the footings. So there's a cascading effect from going after that steel component into multiple bid packages. So those are the kinds of things we targeted. They weren't the only things. You can see the canopies have been removed, except for except right at the entrance here, and also in the back around the classroom wing. And again, they're all steel, lots of footings, lots of cost buried in there. We changed the stone to a brick, to a typical brick. They took some architectural details on the side, and also you'll notice that some of the architectural details along the roof line have been scaled back. So a number of things we selected. Again, it will be noticeable from what was originally approved, but it doesn't affect the instructional program. So no square footage was removed, no adjustments had to be made for the interior of the building for these selections. Let me move on. So that's VE. That's the VE items. The ad alternates I mentioned. You remember from Career and Tech, ad alternates are part of the bid packages, but they are parts that we can receive the bids on, but choose to accept or reject at the bid table, after the bid after the bids. So in this case, typically with a project that's over budget, we might not go down the path of asking. But the fourth one, this exterior storage building, I'm going to make an appeal because that building is used for multiple purposes. It is not only for storage of our grounds equipment and other equipment that we don't want to necessarily put in the building, which prolongs their lives, the lives of that equipment, but it also houses the PE equipment, the exterior PE equipment. And lastly, it houses the emergency generator. Again, if we can put something, take it out of the weather, it's going to last longer, it's going to less maintenance, and it's going to be more reliable. And with an emergency generator, you certainly want it to be reliable. So I would ask that when the deliberation occurs in the next steps, that we keep that in mind and consider adding that. And I keep going the wrong direction. Okay, so the place everybody wants to go to, which is what are the numbers, what are the budget figures we're talking about? So the projected final cost without the ad alternate is about $73 million. It's still staggering given, but the market condition, again, the market is doing what it's doing to us, and it's being felt throughout the industry. So the value engineering efforts that I mentioned netted about $5.5 million, which is an extraordinary amount to pull out of a project at this point in the design. So the staff really worked hard. Bill and Jim, along with the rest of the design team, they really worked hard to pull together everything they could. And again, it didn't affect the schedule, didn't affect the instructional program. Well, I talked earlier about the budget reductions, that we reevaluated the budget, the F&E, and the furniture and equipment, and the contingency. We netted about $2 million there. Now, if the question's going to be, are we comfortable? Jim is never comfortable. He's in construction, so he's never had an 8-hour night's sleep in his life. So, but we know that we can make it come in. We can bring the project in. A little bit of luck in the site work and a little bit of luck with the inflation associated with the furniture and equipment. We think we'll be okay. The other alternatives that I had mentioned about some alternative funding was that we do have a number of projects that aren't closed but are completed, and we feel we can net about $1.8 million from those. If then we look at the county funds, the state Build to Learn funds, those are the next to the last two, and then we have the $600,000 that we'll seek from the state in fiscal year 23 from the state CIP request. So that's the difference between, that $600,000 is the difference between the funds that the Built to Learn Act funds that we received as compared to the state maximum allocation that we sought from the state, from the public school construction program. So where that all points us to at this point, where we are right now, is we have a funding deficit, a delta of $3.24 million. And the funding is to be determined. We have some options to make up for that $3.2 billion. One of them is to seek additional local funding from the county. Our conversations with the Office of Management and Budget, they've recommended that if we do this, we do it through the fiscal year 23 capital cycle. It's the cleanest way to do it, the most efficient way. We could utilize the board's fund balance, some combination of the two. And lastly, and I deliberately put it last, is to look at some of the local projects that might lack state participation at the moment. And those are going to be systemic renovations. Those are going to be the roofs and the HVAC projects. And my concern with those is that, one of our biggest tasks is to keep our buildings warm and dry, indoor air quality and whatnot. So it would be tough to go there, but it's on the table. Every option's on the table to make sure we try to get east to the finish line. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. So, yeah, the last slide is the superintendent's recommendations, and that's to approve the construction contract for East as it's proposed, and then take some time to acknowledging that we have a $3.2 million deficit if we don't add the alternate that I requested in, and to consider alternative funding sources to address it. As Mr. O'Neill mentioned a little earlier, the funding's in place enough to carry us at least through the next fiscal year, so the next cycle, next capital cycle. So there's time for the board to deliberate and determine what the best course of action to make up that deficit is. So with that, I'll
Just a couple of things that I want to follow up on slightly that Ray touched on. The funds that would be available to transfer from other capital projects, I think by now you realize we go through that process every year with Mr. Zaleski and his staff. You have to approve those transfers, and then the commissioners would have to approve those transfers, or else they have to occur with your overall budget action. We just, at the staff-to-staff level, the reason that those funds still remain there, those were funds that when we were looking ahead at a 4-year career and tech project, we kind of, even though those projects were complete, we wanted to sort of hold on to those for the duration of the 4-year project if possible. So we've had that conversation with Mr. Zaleski and his staff, just to make sure that we're all remembering everything as they have to eventually consider these options. On the state funding, on a previous slide, Ray had it broken out in 2 categories. I know we've mentioned this, and I think Dr. Lockhart specifically mentioned this 1 or 2 meetings ago, but we are far enough along now. One of the big what-ifs early on had been, where will the state be with the new funding vehicle, not the state's traditional capital plan, but the new House Bill 1 or Built to Learn Act money. We are far enough along now to know that they're committing to that amount of money using their formula. And what I mentioned earlier, I think Dr. Lockhart at a recent meeting thanked the District 5 delegation for their efforts to make sure we had that sort of guarantee from the state, and we appreciate that. And then the balance would have to come from the traditional capital program, but it's the total maximum due there, so that's why that was broken into 2 categories. When we met with the commissioners the other day, I believe it was Commissioner Frazier, but one of the commissioners asked, could you use ESSER funds? And I think it was Commissioner Frazier, because I said something like, that's a really good question. And he said, why isn't that a great question? And I said, because I don't know the answer to it yet. But we were exploring that anyway. Dr. Lockhart had been having some conversations with us, and staff was trying to ponder that and look at it and talk to some other local school systems to see what they were thinking about. And so, the short answer is it probably could be used, but the thought we have at this stage, a couple of days later, is that it's probably not really a viable or an ideal solution for you or for us locally for a couple of reasons. One is one thing we mentioned the other day to the commissioners. You've already talked about plans for those funds. So you have identified summer recovery, fall and spring recovery, various other supports for students, mostly directly in schools. So there would need to be adjustments and reconsiderations. Secondly, and Ray might need to help me with the technical nature of this. Secondly, our exploration further has sort of revealed that depending on where in the project it would be applied and other complicating questions, other things that weren't part of our project so far, including the bid packages, would come into play, like federal wage scales and that sort of thing. And so it doesn't seem to us that, while it was a really, really good question, it doesn't seem to us that it's going to turn out to be something viable. And so we didn't adjust that slide I guess the previous slide, to include that as an alternative. If you want us to pursue it more, we certainly could, but that's kind of our somewhat informed assessment at this point of how that would work. So we appreciate the time, and we're happy to try to answer any and all questions. And I don't know if Mr. Kyler's still with us or not, because he's vanished from all of the.
There he is,
There he
yes.
is.
He has till 10 o'clock.
Okay.
Mr. Kyler, do you have any comments you want to make first?
Yeah, just quickly, again, I compliment the staff on what they've done throughout this. This is trying times. We're seeing steel go up 200, 300%, and then they tell you can't get it for 6 months. I think we are in line with the state to maximize our money. We don't want to lose that option. And then one of the other things that, and I think, Ray, you had it on the end of one of your slides, some of these projects, HVAC and roof, we constantly kick that can down the road, and sooner or later, we're going to pay dearly. Now isn't probably the time to kick those projects down the road to help this. I think if and by the way, Ms. Herbert, Commissioner Weaver has his hand up too.
I know. I got the message.
You know, if they can't help us with some funds, and I think you said earlier, Mr. Neal, this isn't an emergency this year. We can approve the project and a year from now decide where some of this money is going to come from, even if we've got to go to general funds. So again, I think it would cost us more to delay this than it will to do it now. And it's a shame about the bids. I am kind of impressed. Contractors are still a little hungry. And I think that's the only reason the rest of the job came in under budget. I think 6 months from now, the non-steel packages are also going to go up. Not that extent, but they're going to go up. So again, that's my comments. And yes, Ms. Herbert, you're right. They told me at 10 o'clock your time, they're going to kick me out of here, but I don't have to leave early. They're going to let me go right to the minute.
Thank you, Mr. Kyler. Mr. Weaver, good evening.
Yeah.
Hi.
I just want to thank you and John and Neil for coming over and presenting that way ahead of time. As we get, it's really only 6 months, we're going to be in the budget again, looking at where it's going to, what we have or don't have at that time. But the fact is, you put it on the radar way ahead of time before you approve this even. And that means a lot. I think everybody's thinking along the lines of how do we get to the end on this. And yes, Commissioner Fraser did have some questions on this, but between fund balance, between that, I think you have some possible alternatives to pay for the deficit. Everything's going up in price, and Mr. Collier, you're right. Everything we've been doing here is just inflation setting in on every project we have. But this is cheaper now than it will be, I think, in 2 years. So I really applaud the open communications here. And I'm going to jump ahead just a second while I have the microphone. We do have our joint meeting coming up, but this couldn't wait that long. But I think, those communication lines between the two boards have to stay open and quarterly. So I really thank you. And John, I appreciate you following interesting conversation ahead of time.
Yes, sir.
Ahead of you there. So
That was a
you
bit.
did well.
That was a bit much, Mr. Weaver, but I thought Mr. O'Neill did a fantastic job of giving the presentation, and you all had great questions, and we need to keep that communication open because that was a problem months back, but I thought we need to go ahead, present. I thought he did a great job, and we need to keep those lines open and know where we are with this project. So thank you all. So, Ms. Savigny.
Oh, I just wanted to say additionally, I want to thank the team for meeting with all of us individually ahead of time because we were peppering you with questions, or at least I know I was. And I appreciate you walking us all through it because it's very complex. And time really is of the essence at this point. Like, if this project is going to happen, it has to happen now.
It does.
And so I appreciate your walking through all of that, taking all of our ideas, all of our questions into account. And I do really appreciate the open lines of communication with the commissioners as well, because it's going to take all of us to make this happen.
Well, we thank you for taking your time to come in and to sit through, much of what I went over here, maybe even, more detail. So we appreciate you taking
Yeah,
the time.
this is a tough time. When plywood's $84 a sheet and M2x4s are 8 something every time I go in Lowe's, that's scary. So I really want to get this in, and I want to be first in line because we cannot put this off. Any other comments?
No, just again, thanks.
Yes.
Thank
And
you
again,
all.
I was meeting with Ray and the team at the time, John, when you were over presenting before the commissioners. So as I was leaving, I found a live stream, and I was able to watch your presentation and to hear while I'm trying to drive. So again, great job, and again, I'm glad that the commissioners were very receptive to this. And again, how you all got it down to, I mean, because again, I wanted to see what the bottom line was. That was my main thing, because I knew that's what we were going to eventually head to. So how you went through and did all the things that you all did to get it to the point where, you know, the delta is the 3.2, and I think at one point I heard it was even 3.4.
Oh, that was probably me talking about the ad alternate, the
Okay,
consideration of
adding
the ad
that,
alternate.
okay,
The exterior storage shed.
Exactly.
yeah.
So the ad alternate, you know, just one concluding thought, Ray made his pitch. We're going to have storage there, whether it's part of this project or in some other manner and avenue as a smaller project. We know that, so if Jamie Carver and others are watching, we'll figure out a solution. So if we don't accept the ad alternate as part of this and the additional 175, we'll be working on that over the 2 years of construction to try to figure out a different approach to make that happen. We know that we cannot have that, a school, especially the brand-new school, not have exterior storage for the things that Ray mentioned.
Absolutely, because phys ed teachers need equipment area. I know that for 40 years. So, and then you also need to keep your lawn mowers and snow blowers and all that. So that's gonna probably need to be done.
Rec
So,
councils.
yeah.
Rec councils definitely. Remember that was part of the big discussion when in the planning was, you know, making sure rec councils had access to stuff too.
Ms. Savigny?
So what we're actually, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what we're approving tonight, and that's really setting the guaranteed maximum price.
Correct.
At the $59,795.
Correct. And that would not include that one ad alternate.
We
in that
understand.
amount,
Right. But we are still short, like, so, but those are things that we can work out in the future. But we're setting the guaranteed maximum price.
If we could add the ad alternate now, it would make it part of the GMP instead of putting it in as a change order later. That would be the one.
Tie that in with that.
The one ask, right.
Okay, so the 59,795, 891, that's without the 175,000 for the exterior storage.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right.
And
That's not on there.
you're correct, and the that price for that ad alternate is
175.
All right.
So if you wanted to include the ad alternate as part of the GMP, that number would have to go up by 175 and whatever the precise dollar amount is.
Right. Jim, what's that?
Right.
Yes.
But we have one motion on the floor right now, and we would have to make another motion. So,
Well, I will make a motion to add the ad alternate project of the exterior storage building for $175,000 to the guaranteed maximum price of $59,795,891. So it would be that number plus $175,000
Correct.
for $100.
do we have a
I'll
second?
second that.
Dr.
Second.
Dorsey?
Oh,
I'm
was
sorry, Mr. Kyler, you're in Alaska, you're a little slow.
I was too slow.
All right, any other comments? So this is for the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Now I will call for the vote for the approval of the construction contract for Westminster East Middle School replacement project with the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you
to
so much for everything and everyone's really hard work. I mean, you all have worked really hard on it. And that's a great thing. Thank you, thank you. Phew. That's a biggie. Ms. Savigny, we've done a lot in our, you know what I mean? Yes, in our last 6 years.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you for being here.
Mr. Marks will put you up in a hotel tonight. on his bill. All right, now I need a motion for the approval of the strategic plan 2018 through 2023, version 4.1,
So moved.
by Ms. Pataglia and seconded by
I'll second.
Ms. Savigny.
Okay.
Dr. Locker.
Board members, as you recall, we held a work session in June with you to discuss the status of the original focus areas of the strategic plan, as well as recommendations for revisions for the future. We took the feedback from you from that discussion, as indicated then, and are returning a revised plan for your approval. The copy you have received has highlighted in yellow all places where revisions exist. Mr. Anderson and other staff are available for any questions or additional discussion or additional recommendations you may have.
Thank you, board members. As Dr. Locker just said, I'm presenting you this evening with the recommendations of staff that we all agreed upon at the work session, and they've been highlighted. And what I was asking was for action for approval so that we can go ahead and get this formally and finalized on our website, so then we can go ahead and continue to work towards meeting these goals. Any questions or concerns or thoughts?
Ms. Savigny.
Mr., you knew I was going to say yes, right?
I did.
On page 4, I did have a couple of questions. I know that the budget facts
Yeah.
are not the updated facts
Yeah,
that we had
those-
discussed at the.
Yeah, that's correct. When it was submitted, those weren't totally updated yet. They've been updated now. So with board permission, what I'd like is to have the opportunity to have it approved tonight with some amendments. That would be one of them.
Okay. And we had talked about how this was 46.8% for 2019, and I believe it was something along the lines of 42 or 43%.
Yeah, the actual new metric there is 43.4% of the county revenue, and that is a result of, essentially, that's a result of all of us receiving, several dollars of federal funds and grants and those types of things.
Okay. Okay, so it's not a reflection of local funding percentages necessarily coming down. It's just because of all the additional funds during the pandemic that are
I
coming in.
think it's on both parts, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what it is that both entities, our county government received significant funds also from federal funds, as well as we did too. So I think that in itself had adjusted the numbers a little bit to be illustrating 43.4%. Okay.
Okay, okay.
So, Ms. Savigny, your first correction is, or amendment, or?
It's under
On
the.
page 4,
Yes.
Okay.
on page 4, underneath budgetary facts, Ms. Herbert, we've.
I'm just trying to keep track so that we
Yeah.
get this right.
Yeah, so that we will update the operating budget, as well as the local revenue, and per pupil expenditure for 2019, and then the wealth per pupil of 2022.
Yeah, right.
Yep,
This, okay. I just want to make sure that
absolutely.
we get this right.
and the return on investment is not done annually,
Okay.
correct?
All right, Ms. Savigny, next.
Okay. The next one is the attendance rate for 2020 and 2021. Those are showing as blank at the moment.
What page?
On
Oh,
page
those
four.
are showing
Okay.
blank right now because we'll have those in the fall.
Okay.
We'll have those metrics in the fall, and then at that time, we'll put them in, and obviously, we'll notify the board. But that is pending us getting the final numbers.
Okay.
Yep, from the state.
The next piece of it was on page 10. So, and I do appreciate, I had requested that we break out and be very specific about the different
Yes.
minority groupings.
Yes.
And I see that those have been added, so I appreciate seeing that.
Yes.
The one thing that, because we're leaving the white and the minority breakdowns on page 10.
Okay.
In that way, right? And it's because of what we have readily available from a reporting perspective.
Yeah.
Right? But if we could put an asterisk there, just to say specifically what is defined as minority, so there's no question about what's potentially getting lumped into the minority category versus getting lumped into the white category.
Yeah, and for Carroll County Public Schools, essentially, that will be all the, essentially, student identifiers other than our white students. We'll break it down as we've done with the high school population just above it.
Right.
Be happy to do that with an
Okay,
asterisk.
right, so it would just be stating that, say, Asians and Pacific Islanders and things like
Correct.
that, so all of those are included in the minority category?
Absolutely, and we can certainly do that as a remedy for right now. But we do plan to, once we get back into taking the actual assessment again in the new MCAP, then what we can do when we get the new data is to go ahead and run that report and build a new chart that has all the different identifiers in there, all the different demographics.
Okay, great. And then the last set is on page 15. Well, I'm sorry, actually, page 14.
Okay, pillar number 2.
Pillar number 3.
Pillar number 3.
Pillar number 3, on the bottom of page 14. So we have CCPS will offer 25% more open contracts to minority teachers in the preceding year. I think we had talked about just inserting the word qualified there, just to make that stipulation.
Yep.
And then with that stipulation, like when you look at the next one, and we had talked about this a little bit at the work session, but where it says each area of the school system will improve staff diversity by filling 5% of the vacancies with minority candidates, that really feels like a quota. And I struggle with that one because I'd rather see an action plan to attract and retain more minority candidates, but not put in a quota that can be achieved by reducing standards, right? And I think that we achieve that by the item that was on the previous page for item 14, right? Where we're saying CCPS will offer 25% more open contracts to qualified minority teachers than the preceding year. I think that covers it, right? Like that's our plan. That's one of our action plans to attract and retain more minority teachers. I'm thinking that the next one is not needed. Board members, thoughts
Well,
on that?
Again, I think whenever you see the percentages or numbers, from what I'm hearing, you always equate it to quotas rather than targets. This is what we're aiming for. So I think to me, it's really setting a target for what the system is hoping to achieve. And again, like we said before, it's always concerning qualified persons. I mean, we're just not throwing people who fit certain breakdowns into the system just to say, okay, now we'll get those numbers up. No, we're always looking for qualified people. But again, I'm seeing that as targets rather than quotas, so to speak. So I guess that's just a matter of terminology and where we are here. But
Ms. Savigny, to also, and I understand you're thinking about the one before that would take care of it, and at a larger scale. John just informed me, though, that typically our practice in Carroll County Public Schools, in most public school systems, we only offer open contracts to actual teaching candidates, not necessarily support employees. And I think the point was that was measuring all different departments. So that could be something when we're looking for a solution on how we want to do this, we just have to take that into consideration.
Is there a way to, and I'm struggling with seeing how this would work, right? Like 5% of open positions, in a lot of cases, that's going to be less than a person, right? Like, can this actually be done
Right.
in practice? I mean, do you make a caveat about the open contracts and saying that, you have a different action plan for support positions?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever the board would
Yeah,
like to do.
I agree with Donna on that because it does look like a quota to me, and I think we need to change that in some way. They've got to be qualified, but when you look at that, it's like, what are we doing here? Are we just filling it, or are we going to do qualified?
Right, so going to that second priority focus area, I completely understand making it the 25% more open contracts for qualified minority teachers.
Right.
And what you're saying there is, I think what you're making a recommendation, and as is President Herbert, is that do we need that second priority focus, or is there something we can add to the first highlighted priority focus to be inclusive of not just teachers?
Right.
I don't know how we would approach that right now. We could certainly come up with some ideas for the board, but right now, what I hear you saying is that, Jason, is there another way that we could potentially look at actively recruiting minority employees in all areas of our school system that are qualified? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm struggling with seeing how we actually achieve this, right? As a
You're back on the
as-
5%?
Yeah, as a measure.
Do we have any thoughts from like a human resource perspective? I mean, I don't know if we're going to be able to come up with an answer this evening,
Right.
but I think that we could probably sit down and,
We just have
look
to
at it.
think of different wording on that.
Yeah, because again, looking at the numbers
Oh,
compared to the
When-
total.
Whenever you talk about a measure, you're going to be looking at percentages. And so to say you want to measure on the one hand and say you don't want to have a quota on the other hand, you have the potential of having a disconnect. I think the mandate is for the board to strive to meet the aspirational goals set forth in COMAR, which says that local boards of education shall develop and implement plans and procedures for the attainment of racial balance at the various levels of the public school system, reflective of the composition of the population of their respective jurisdictions. It's an aspirational goal. It is not a prescribed ratio. You're looking for good candidates, no matter what the candidate's race or color might be. That's a given. And you state that on page 14. I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, the concern is the 5%. But we do have a mandate. The mandate has been in COMAR for decades. We've never come close. Or at least not since desegregation. So again, it's an aspirational goal. I've written to the Attorney General's office on this extensively. But, it's an important thing that we meet that shall develop and implement language.
And I agree with that, certainly with the shall, and I agree with the intent.
Well, like I said, it's an
What
aspirational
what I'm struggling with is when we say, 5% of, fill it, within each one of these categories, there aren't that many openings.
Right.
And when you break it down into these categories, there aren't that many openings. So it feels like an unattainable.
Mr. Amelia, you had said you were just bringing us back to the 5%, and you were saying that seems like that's one of the challenges that we're looking at right here. Is a potential solution that each area of the school system would improve staff diversity by filling vacancies with qualified minority candidates, and then that basically doesn't put necessarily a goal of 5% for any time, there's open spots, but more so of that is our goal. John?
Dr. Dorsey, you want to say something while
Well,
he's John
yeah.
coming up?
It seems like whenever we're talking about minority candidates, we always come back to use the adjective, well, they have to be qualified. We want all of our people to be qualified, so I don't think we need to specifically state whenever we're talking about the minority population to say that we want them to be qualified. That's a given, so.
Well, if it's a given, then why not state it? I think, I don't really.
If you say it for minority teachers, since I'm saying it's a given, you would say it then as your discussing any teacher or any.
But we
with them.
say it in several instances in non-minority situations in all of Pillar 2. We say qualified candidates.
Okay, so if it's already noted there, do we have to come back and sort of restate it here for minority candidates? It's just something I'm having just some discomfort with as it's being discussed, because again, it just seems like whenever we're talking about the minority candidates, we have to make sure we're saying, oh, but they have to be qualified. Well, yeah, we want qualified staff members in our school system, period.
I think it is a given, and we say it in multiple places in non-minority situations. We're saying we want qualified candidates. We're trying to build a successful workforce. So I think it's a reasonable statement to put everywhere. Because I think there's a pushback in certain places in the community about quotas, saying, okay, well, I don't care whether someone's minority or not, we just want the most qualified candidates. And I think that if we simply say, yes, we have a directive and an intent to meet these goals, and we're not going to sacrifice standards in any way. Like we've said it for our students, we've said it, and we've said it for the teachers who are not minorities. So I think it's just holding that concept through. Like we're going to meet these aspirational goals, and we're going to do it with qualified candidates.
We want a qualified work staff. So,
I don't think anybody's ever argued that we didn't want a qualified work staff. It was a lot of the conversations we were hearing, excuse me, in the public when, like it was always saying, basically we're going to meet this goal, we're going to meet this target of a percentage of minority people who are going to be hired. The problem is we're not supposed to hire people based on their skin color. It shouldn't matter. It's supposed to be qualified. But putting it out on paper, that just makes people go, wait a minute, so you're just going to base an application based on the color of their skin, just to make sure you meet that percentage. And I think when we had the strategic workshop and we were talking about all this, because those are things that the community is saying. I mean, it's not just the school system, it's just the community as a whole, it's the state as a whole. And it's things that we just constantly keep hearing, you won't qualified. So why do we have to keep pinpointing, we're going to hire this much percentage from this group and this much percentage from that group? I mean, could it just be a people as a whole? I mean, I think that's the problem that people are just getting frustrated with.
well, and again, when they fill out the applications, they really don't indicate their race on the application. Is that correct?
That's correct. They legally.
I mean, they can
Right.
indicate later.
Don't ask that information.
So, as to the question that Jason had last raised, I don't personally have an objection if the plan simply said, however you said it, but quite frankly, that's been the law since 1971, so I'm not sure that, I don't know what the point of that would be to restate the COMAR in our plan.
Devanshi?
I also think we need to revisit why we want minority teachers in our classroom in the first place. I mean, we want to see our minority students see themselves reflected, and then we want our students to grow up knowing diverse perspectives, being exposed to different cultures, being exposed to different types of people, because that's how the real world is. Like, I've heard from students, like, when they go outside to college, like, their experiences go outside to college or just go outside of the county even, and they're exposed to so many different people from so many different backgrounds, like cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, like people of different race, different ethnicities. And I think we need to consider that the reason we want to attract minority teachers to the school system in the first place is so our students are college and career ready. They're able to fully be able citizens of the world.
No one was arguing that we want to hire minorities. Nobody was arguing that. It was the fact of constantly pinpointing this percentage, this percentage, this percentage. We want to meet this percentage. That's the only thing. It's just, we want to hire qualified people. That's it.
Definitely.
But constantly pointing out someone's difference is the problem.
Okay, but I think the point Devontae was making as well is that, again, and that's what's noted on page 14, where we do want to make sure that it's reflective, you know, the staff is reflective of our student body. So,
And
But why do we have to constantly point that out? I think that's the problem the community is having, is why are we constantly have to point out people's differences? Why do we constantly have to, oh, this is the percentage for this and this is the percentage for that? That's what the community is frustrated with. They don't care where you come from. They don't care your background. They just want you to be qualified.
well, again, if we do want to have, and again, I think this was in here long before our time on the board, but as far as saying that, you know, we do want to have the employees reflective of our school system community, and we certainly want it to sort of be reflective as much as possible of the student body as well.
I can say, I think Dr. Dorsey and Ms. Pataglia, I think the reason why the goals were presented the way they were was because of the objectives, yes. The objectives are to recruit and retain highly qualified, diverse employees. That's the strategic plan, that's the board's goal, objectives. And so I know when John and team put those priority focus areas forward to you all, it was in the best interest of how do we continue to meet these objectives. And as you said, this was done well before many of us. However, it sounds like it's about a percentage. And I think that we can still be in compliance with COMAR without having that percentage, is what I'm hearing also. Is that accurate?
So are you saying not to have any measure, or?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying what I heard Ms. Savigny was spending time on is how, Jason, how would you measure 5%? You know, that's not even a person, that's not even.
For each one of these individual categories.
That's not even really a position, you know, if you're looking at 5%. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, would a remedy be removing the 5%?
Devontae?
And I don't know all the aspects of hiring and all, but I do know that in school, when we learn of goal setting, we learn about SMART goals, right? For example, and
Measurable, attainable,
yeah,
result-oriented, timely.
exactly. And I think that if we don't set a target, how do we guarantee that the goal, however aspirational it may be, will be achieved or worked towards in the future years? So.
Mr. Emili?
So I go back to what I said earlier. We're supposed to develop and implement plans and procedures for the attainment of racial balance. So mimicking the COMAR reg doesn't do anything. It's mandating that we develop a plan and procedure to attain something. So what's the plan? The mandate is to develop a plan. What's the plan?
So right now, we do have recruit and retain highly qualified, diverse employees reflective of our school system community. That's our very first priority focus area. Our baseline performance has been set, and we had our baseline performance from 2018-19. Our goals and targets, as the board wanted them in the past, was a 6% of the staff would be minority. That's what's been in the plan. That's a plan. The second piece, which is highlighted, which I don't hear any objection from board members of, CCPS will offer 25% more open contracts to minority teachers, qualified minority teachers, than the preceding year. That also is part of a plan.
Right, and I view that as a plan.
Right, but I
And
don't
we
think
need an
there's no-
action plan to, and I don't disagree, I agree with everything that you said, Devontae, I really do. And we want to develop a workforce that is reflective of our student population. What I'm trying to understand is that I want more of an action plan to attract and retain more qualified minority candidates. Other than saying, we're just going to fill positions with minority candidates. Do people understand the distinction?
I understand.
It's like, how are we going to attract and retain those employees, not just, we're going to put employees in those positions?
Well, Yeah, the last piece also, which is part of our plan, I'm trying to have a conversation without going there right now, but the last piece also, which I think the board was fine with, was that CCPS will improve the rate of employees who respond 7 or higher on a perceptual survey about their comfort and how supportive they feel in our environment. That also will retain our teachers. If we understand if our minority teaching force or employee force, actually, I think the survey was sent out to minority employees for the first time this year. If we see that folks are feeling supported and comfortable, then we have a high likelihood of retaining those employees.
Dr. Lockhart.
So John, we do have strategies for just what Ms. Savigny said, and that is attracting and retaining minority employees. We don't go into that level of specificity here. Is that what you're looking for? Some of those specific, okay, here's how we can improve in this area.
Correct. We have strategies all across this plan. But
Right.
there's I'm
Yeah.
not sure there's another place in this plan where the plan's about the strategies. It's about the measurable outcomes.
Yeah, we share the what and the why, and you all develop the how through the strategies that you come up with.
The 5% in the aggregate is not new to this plan. The former version had that. So that's sort of why it carries forward in a refined way.
I guess then what I would like to see is a little bit more detail behind the strategies and the action plan, right? Like we've talked about that 5% number written in a different way in prior versions of the strategic plan, right? And we're not achieving it, right?
We talked about it in the aggregate.
Right. We talked about it in the aggregate. We didn't kind of break it down into pieces, which this starts becoming portions of FTEs, right? Like, is that actually achievable? But I want to understand what are the action plans behind meeting this goal, rather than simply saying we're going to fill openings with minority candidates. They're saying, well, what are we going to do? And so I guess this is the measure in the strategic plan, right? But we do need additional action plans behind the strategic plan that says, how are we going to achieve that particular goal?
The actual strategies, as Dr. Lockwood said.
Right. Right, so I'll try to use the same terminology, right? Like I think of it as action plans, you call it strategies. So,
Well, yeah, because
I didn't know if you were going to talk.
Well, I was going to say, okay, in what forum? In the plan, in a presentation, in a work session? How would you like to delve below the plan?
well, we had strategies that we developed as part of like the next layer of the strategic plan in prior iterations, right? Like these are really just the goals.
These are objectives, priority focus areas, and then the measures, yes.
Right, right. But there was an iteration of the strategic plan that also said, here are the strategies, I believe, of how we're going to achieve these measurable goals, right?
No, I mean, it may have been before my time, but there was nothing as that specific, but certainly that's something that we can definitely provide, how we go at it. I can.
Well, and that's probably true of everything that we have here. So look at how cumbersome that would be to come up with a document that's really showing all the strategies, all the ways that we've identified to address each of these areas.
I guess I'm just wondering from the board, there's obviously, there's some still questions about that priority focus area. I believe we have three priority focus areas right now that everyone's in agreement with within Pillar 3. Is that accurate? I'm just trying to get agreement right now. And then the one that we're held up on right now is priority focus number 4, which was the second highlighted from the work session. I'm just going to ask, does the board want to continue to keep that? Does the board want for us to go back and work on that? I want to be clear on what the board wants us to do right now. Do we want to go back and revise that? do we need that? Do we want that? I mean, we're open to, if we need to reimage it.
I'm not hearing a whole lot of support for it, so I'll drop it. I will say the revisions that we've made so far on the budget facts, the attendance information when we have it, the asterisk definition.
I think that was it so far.
I would like to add the word qualified on page 14. Just to take that argument and the air out of the fodder in the community. And that's really what that's intended to address. And then I will concede to leave in the items on page 15. And those were the last of the comments that I had.
President Herbert, I wanted to draw your attention. Dr. Lockhart also made the recommendation, although it was a statement made, how we wanted to have a perceptual system survey done for employees. And so we wrote there in pillar number 4 at the bottom that a community perceptual survey will be administered in the spring of 2022 to students, staff, and families to get additional insight on climate at each school and at the community at large.
Oh, yeah, I read that, but I'm just trying to keep track of all the, I read that, I was just trying to keep
No,
track.
I just wanted to let you know we
No,
put that in there.
No, I saw that, but I was just trying to keep track of all the corrections or the things that we need to change.
So, may I ask for an amendment with approval with amendment, or would you like me to bring it back?
Well, I'll make a motion for those changes, and I'm okay with approving it tonight if that
Okay.
amendment goes, if that motion
Okay.
goes through. Does that?
So yes, we have to do page 4, the attendance, page 10, with the asterisk defining minority, and pillar 3, we need to put in qualify. Am I missing anything?
That's what I have.
Okay, so,
So I make the motion for those amendments.
okay, do we have a second? Ms. Battaglia, second the motion. Any other comments or questions?
I still have a hang-up here. Again, I like the overall plan, but again, and I would hate for one word to say, okay, I'm not going to support our strategic plan because I will support it. But again, you know, just think about what I had said earlier. I mean, with our use of always having to stress that we want qualified, diverse employees or qualified minorities. But again, as far as the plan overall, I think you all have worked hard, and again,
Take that 5%.
I don't think we've really finished. Were you going to say any more concerning Pillar 4 or not, Mr. Anderson?
Other than, I know Mr. Williams was working on that school evaluation checklist, and that is very much in its iterative state. And we would obviously be sharing that with you all once we have that finally baked, and then we'll be using it in schools. The other piece is the board was clear that we're going to keep the major referral data, and then we are also going to add on a student perceptual survey, which would be completed in the winter of '22 as a baseline.
Were we going to break down the major referrals at all by race, ethnicity?
I know we talked about that. You did
I
in
do
your
think
report.
we reported that.
Pillar 4 report.
In the Pillar 4 report, Dr. Dorsey, we broke that down, but
Oh,
in the,
okay.
so
No,
I
I'm
know
just-
that when we did the report last year at the board's request, we did include the breakdown by school as well as
Yes,
race
I remember
ethnicity.
that. I remember that, but
I
we're not going
noticed
to
it's not in
reflect
the-
it here.
We certainly could,
That wasn't part of the work session
Okay.
conversation, but if that's something that the board would like to see, we have that data.
right, we certainly will report it. I mean, and how, if, I guess we haven't had any conversation or thought about what the strategic plan would look like as far as reduction or rate or, so if that's the desire of the board, that we look at the metrics within ethnicity and by school, we would need to know, we would need time to develop what the goal would be. So the plan as a whole has a goal of reducing major referrals by 5%. We wouldn't have any goals regarding that. I feel more comfortable saying we will report that, but I'm not in a position right now at all where I can say we have an analysis. And I do think, if you think back to the report where we talked about how few individual students were reflected in that discipline data, and knowing the migration of students year to year, and some of the growth perhaps even school to school, I do think it's a bit of a struggle to try to report by individual school any changes. So
I would need to see that breakdown, but again, I think I've raised the issue before that when it says that we're creating a welcoming culture of diversity, respect, by really showing the referrals as we're showing them, to me, it's not giving me that info.
Well, as Mr. Streeter said, we certainly can work towards that. That wasn't brought up at the work session, that's why it's not reflected here this evening.
Okay.
But that's certainly something that we can go, as he said, he's run the reports that way, but as he also said, it's very difficult to get the numbers because there's repeat offenders. It's a small contingent of students often that present a large quantity of behavior.
Okay.
And also, Doc, just to share, remember that, I'm trying to think of the right year, like we want to forget last year.
At this time,
The
you can say any year, I'll go along with it.
Last year, or the year we just finished, that referral data is going to be
Yes.
like almost, don't want
Will
to say
look good,
useless,
right.
but it's so skewed because of COVID. So to even have it as a baseline would be really challenging.
Yeah, but then again, to know that we do get that at another
We will
time.
report it.
Yeah.
And we can certainly, if it's something we desire, we could add, and report out. And we captured that last year. We did report out by school and by race, ethnicity. We certainly can put that in the plan. And we can work on metrics if we want to. But remember, 1920, if that's the right year, 2021 data is going to be really skewed because of the impact of COVID. So
Yes, okay, thanks. We've addressed that enough. Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted like ask a procedural question. Are we in discussion for the amendment or for the strategic plan?
The amendment,
So we're still in
The
the
amendment.
the amendment.
Okay.
There was a motion and a second on the amendment, and it hasn't been voted on.
No. So what happens, Mr. Anderson, if we take that statement out there on page 15? And then come back and fill it with something else?
For the
I'm just-
priority-
I'm
for
just
the priority-
asking.
No, for the priority focus area there at the top.
Yep.
What happens is that we can do two things. We can bring it back. The staff can go back and work at it and bring it back. Or you can leave it as it is now. You can adjust the priority focus area. But I hear loud and clear that percentages are, that's a measure. So we want to see something quantifiable. We'll do whatever the board would like to do.
Okay.
We can approve it as it is tonight with the amendments, or we're more than happy to go work at it and bring it back next month. Whatever the board's pleasure is, we'll do.
Just wondered. Okay. So do we have any more discussion on the amendment? Okay.
So,
All right.
so the amendment that was made, though, is leaving page 15 as is.
Okay, I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It passes.
Wait,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
wait.
Did you say aye, or? I
Aye.
couldn't hear, okay.
Now, that
That
was
was the amendment.
amendment. Okay.
That's with that staying right now.
Yeah, that's-
So-
okay.
So staff can begin to work towards it.
Now, we need to call for the vote for the approval of the entire package. All right? Oh, okay. Well, yes, Devanshi?
I have a question in Pillar 4. So the student perceptual survey, what exact topics are going to be covered in that?
So I'll start, and Mr. Streeter, you tell me if I'm right on this direction. So what we're looking to do is, we do know that a lot of the MSDE survey that was taken, it provides us with some quantities and some percentages, but we're really not quite certain as it relates to the actual questions being asked to our students when we're talking about the actual bullying report or whatever the topic may be, how safe kids feel in schools. So what we were hoping to do is to create our own survey, maybe in-house, maybe we would contract with someone that does this for a living, that might be third party, where it may provide more integrity to the measure. Either way, what we want to be able to do is to provide insights to school leaders on a more timely basis about how kids are feeling about school. See, I couldn't do it. I tried.
We've identified some schools, school-based administrators, counselors, to develop the survey. So we're in the very initial planning phases, and one of our intents is to make sure that the feedback that our survey provides will provide our school-based leadership teams input as to what they can do at the school-based level. So we've already identified.
And that data would drive school improvement plans
Right.
the following year.
So they can say, this is how our school did, this is an area we want to focus in on, and move forward. So that's our intent.
And you may have covered this, but I was just wondering what sorts of quantifiable data that survey would because I heard from a lot of students that when they do have a survey like that, they like to express a problem in written form, like give written feedback a lot more than possibly just clicking numbers on a scale, because oftentimes every student's perception of the scale is much different.
I think that's great feedback, Devanshi, that we can certainly share with the team that's putting the survey together, that it would have a place that not only, for relative comparison, the Likert scales are very important, but I think what you're sharing is, and a great point, that we give an option for students to add anecdotal experiences, and then that feedback will be really powerful, I think, for the school-based teams.
It is powerful. It's rich data. It's hard oftentimes to conduct analyses because it's a lot of, you're combing through a ton of narration. But there's benefits to both, and there's obviously programs that are available for us to be able to capture that data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to call for the vote for the approval of the strategic plan 2018 to 2023 version 4.1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. And now I need a motion for the approval of memorandum of agreement among the Maryland Historic Trust, Maryland Public School Construction, and Carroll County Board of Education regarding East Middle.
So moved.
By Ms. Savigny, and who was it over here? Ms. Battaglia seconded the motion.
Okay, board members, with your early approval of the guaranteed maximum price construction contract for the East Middle project, we're now bringing you approval of the memorandum of agreement with the Maryland Historical Trust. You'll recall that given the age and historical significance of the current school, it's a required process with the Maryland Historic Trust and a community committee to ensure the heritage of the current school is properly considered in the construction project. Ultimately, this requires an agreement between the Historical Trust, you, the board, and the Maryland Public School Construction Program. And so we're bringing that now forward for your approval.
Comments, questions? All right, then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. All right, and now I need a motion for the approval of the CCPS Recovery Plan 2021-2022. Thank you, gentlemen. Do I have a motion? So moved. By Ms. Battaglia, second by
I'll second.
Ms. Savigny.
Okay. So as you know, we learned from MSDE on July 8th that every local board was required to submit a 2021-22 recovery and return to learning plan based on certain state criteria. MSDE requires that our plan be submitted to them and then posted on our website by Friday, August 13th. That's this Friday. So we had a quick turnaround. Therefore, we're bringing it to you now for approval. The plan has been developed around criteria provided by MSDE, and so I'll just give you a couple of highlights in the draft plan as presented. So we have a summary of the summer and school year academic recovery and return to learning, clarity that we will be open in person 5 days per week, a summary of student supports, including for students in quarantine, and updated system operational procedures, clarification that was reiterated this evening through board's decision that masks are optional except on buses as required by federal order. Return of community, we're going to return to community use of facilities. I have shared with you that I'm likely going to pause the volunteer program temporarily until we get some weeks and some success under our belts. Continuation of ample PPE, soap, hand sanitizer, continue of our building ventilation enhancements, use of air purifiers, use of air filtration units in the health suites. The state also requires us to send the plan for feedback to the same stakeholder groups as we did with the reopening plan at the start of last year. So we've submitted that to those stakeholder groups and offered them the opportunity to provide feedback. Given the very short time window, it wasn't feasible that we had groups review and submit feedback in time for this meeting. So MSDE actually acknowledged that that might be the case. So we're asking for stakeholder feedback for the plan's appendix when we receive it, and we'll inform you as it's received. So, Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Dr. Lockard. A couple of items that we'd like to specifically bring your attention to in light of some ongoing considerations we've had since we've loaded the draft plan into your board documents, and also in light of some of the earlier conversation here this evening. So under the building access guidelines, which are on page 12, per the earlier discussion with the superintendent, we would then recommend striking the sentence that says parent volunteers will be welcome back in school buildings to assist in classrooms, because Dr. Locker's advising that we'd like to limit the number of different folks entering the buildings. You had a lot of conversation earlier about the testing program. That did not make it into the draft. We recognized after the document was loaded and that was being developed that we would like to include it in here. So we would like to revise this draft to include the testing program. That could either fall under screening and quarantine guidelines, or it could fall under its own separate section in the plan, either in student supports or in operational procedures. And then I'll ask Ms. McCabe to be ready, but relative to, there's a section, and I'll try to find it while I'm talking, there's a section that addresses services to students who are in quarantine, and I suppose that by extension could include students in a home and hospital mode, whether in quarantine or not. Dr. Lockard, Ms. McCabe, and the school directors were discussing ways in which we could do a little bit more with that service and provide a little bit more direct service to students. And we've discussed the idea of, if you think back to some of the earlier conversations we had with you relative to the federal money when we were entertaining the possibility of a more formalized virtual program, one of the positions we discussed, and at that time, especially at the secondary level, so middle and high schools, was something we were calling, I think, a virtual student coach or a student support coach, kind of an instructional assistant or a paraprofessional type position who would be in the school every day when students are learning, or during the time when students should be learning, but they could coordinate the student learning virtually, help connect family students to certain teachers where there's a need, that sort of thing. And did Cindy come here? And Cindy can help fill in what we would be looking at there.
So what we would be looking at is one position that would be in student services that would coordinate those families who would like their children in home and hospital, coordinating the paperwork for that, and the 60-day reviews, as well as supporting families through the process of home and hospital application, and then also supporting students through quarantine. What we're looking at is having an instructional assistant position in each of the schools to focus on students who are in quarantine and making sure that they are getting the learning that they need during the time they're out. So each teacher would put resources up on their learning management platform, either Google Classroom or Schoology, whatever they're using. And those learning resources would be there, students would use them, they would turn in work, they would be able to communicate with their teacher on that system. But we know that we're going to have some students in quarantine who may need more support than that. And so the position in each school, that instructional assistant position, would be a success coach for those students who we have out in quarantine. They would touch base with students and their parents during the school day. They would communicate with teachers so that teachers would know if a student was struggling with a particular concept, to get more resources from that teacher for a particular student. And they could also coordinate any after-school virtual tutoring options that teachers might be willing to do and be paid hourly to do for students who are in quarantine. So what we're realizing is the number of students who we have in quarantine may be high at particular times during the school year. And so we want to make sure that because we don't have synchronous learning going on for those students, that we have more than just saying to the student, go to the LMS, go to Schoology or go to your Google Classroom, that there's more there to support the student. There's a person in each school as well as someone here coordinating the effort so that we make sure that our students don't fall behind when they're in that quarantine situation, especially if they end up quarantined more than once.
So we would recommend adding that description to the plan. That would mean that those are positions not recognized in the budget actions you've taken prior. So we would be revitalizing those positions or similar type positions from the original list that was in front of you when we were looking at a virtual program. You would in essence be, if you accept that recommendation and approve this plan accordingly, you would then be approving those FTE as well for the next school year. They would be one-time positions, so they would be filled with the knowledge that they're there for school year 21-22, and then would go away. That doesn't mean that the people themselves wouldn't be absorbed later in a different role or a vacancy the next year. The one-time funds are available still, obviously, so it's not your operating budget, it's not an additional funding request, it would be ESSER 2 or 3 funding that would be applied in that instance.
How does that, where does that recommendation come in?
Verbally now, so where would it appear in the plan? I think under the student support section around students in quarantine, that would become.
Right, we would have put it in when we began writing the plan and when we turned the plan in. What we're doing is responding to the statistics in real time. As we see the number of cases go up and we prepare for the fall, we just want to make sure that if we have many students in quarantine at one time, that we have more to support them than just the LMS.
Okay.
So, this is something that we've really been discussing and meeting about just in the last week or so.
Okay, so you would add that under the student support section?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Battaglia?
I have two questions. I know as we said right now we're going to limit the building access for volunteers. My first question is going to be, what about the meet and greets that are scheduled right now for schools?
So they're still going on as planned.
Okay. The second question, I actually seen this quite a bit, was what is going to be happening with water fountains? Are we going to be covering the water fountains back up again, or are there different types being installed to make sure that,
Mr. Prokop spent the end, or his team spent the end of the school year, summer, reinstating all the fountains and bottle fillers. So unless we receive a directive from the health department or from you, those are all operational now, right? In this building and in all schools, those have been returned to operational.
okay.
And there are bottle fillers in every building now. Every school has at least one bottle filler now, so it's not, the only option is not just the water fountain.
Okay.
Devanshi?
I have a question regarding attendance. How will that be handled for quarantined kids and kids who use the learning management system?
So for students in quarantine, it will count as an absence, but there's a specific code that we can use that ensures that it's known that the student had to be absent. It wasn't the student's choice to be absent, and it would not count against the student as far as perfect attendance.
Okay, because I know if, like, for programs like the CTC, oftentimes there's an attendance eligibility criteria. So.
Right, it wouldn't be held against the student.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Does it make sense to state that in the plan, that there's a different code that would be used for attendance, just so there's no confusion?
We certainly can. We can add that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Any other, Devanshi?
So with student recovery and all, will more tutoring options be available for students like there were last year, or will they be more limited?
What was the last part, Devanshi?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So will more tutoring options be open for students similar to last year, or will they be more limited?
Now through through law now, we have to continue to provide tutoring instructional options 4-to-1, and to make sure that it's not 3, but it's 4. And we are working right now. The directors are doing an amazing job of working with principals to recruit staff that's going to be available to work with students 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I think we've all come to the conclusion that it'll be after school for at least an hour. Mike Hardesty and his team has been amazing, and they're ready to go in regards to setting up routes once we identify the students. And that will be running from September 27th? September 27th through November, I believe, 19th, right before Thanksgiving holiday. And then what we'll do is it'll stop for the holiday season, and then it'll pick back up in January and run through April.
Another question. So we know the last school year has had a really big mental toll on the student, especially in terms of like mental health and social well-being. So what are we going to do to sort of combat that this year?
Yeah.
Address that
Do you
specifically?
mind if I speak to that? So there's discussions right now, and obviously there's a ton of planning going on. That was part of that when we're talking about the multi-tiered systems of support, Ms. Savigny, that you mentioned earlier about being RTI. We take into consideration all behavioral supports and interventions as well, and social emotional support. And so that is not off the table as a potential option for after school as well for the extended learning.
Thank you.
I do have a question. And when you said after school, I know last year, now correct me, Dr. Lockett, if I'm wrong, we did 7 interventionists at the elementary. Am I correct? And I remember it was a bus because we were in school, we were out of school, and it didn't work. Now, we don't have that then this year, right?
Actually,
Because I thought you said you weren't.
No, we do.
yeah,
It's
actually,
a grant.
the data is very impressive of those 7 folks, and we've worked with directors to pull that data. And I think I provided that data to Dr. Lockert a couple weeks ago. It wasn't perfection because of the schedules and the kids being available in
Right.
attendance. But what we've seen and the feedback from the principals has been extremely positive, and the results as far as the improvement has been very positive as well. So I know, I mean, I gave that to you a couple weeks ago to look at, but
We're required to
Yeah.
provide to the grant
Yeah.
for the assurances,
State,
the progress that
Yeah.
was made. I can certainly provide that.
And then we're paying teachers after school then to
Yeah,
tutor?
so what you just referenced, the 7 primary interventionists, they work during the day, and actually that's at the elementary school. I think it's going to be 1. Actually, we have 7 folks that are going to be focusing on a better schedule to provide more consistent interventions throughout the school day. In addition to that, there will be an hour of academic supplemental instruction that's taking place Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday after school.
All right, I just thought they didn't like them pulling them out, and the teachers after school knew their students, so,
Yeah. In fact, some of the feedback that we received about those interventionists was about the collaboration that they saw with the primary interventionists and the teachers. So it's getting better.
Yep.
Yeah.
any other questions? Devanshi?
Just one last question. Will tutoring be offered for all students or just those who are struggling in their classes?
Right now, our focus is just on those who are struggling. Again, the ratio of 4 to 1 will keep the student population numbers small. Again, that's the law, and we know that we'll have greater efficacy that way. So really, it's about finding and recruiting the teachers to do the work, to commit to those 3 days a week after school, and then making sure that they have only 4 students to work with. We're also looking at, Mr. King and I had a great idea that we're going to be looking at also some credit recovery options that we can utilize with those funds, keeping it more of an intimate environment. So kids don't have to run to the lab at another location, just do it right in their school.
Thank you.
You got it.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
President Herbert, might I summarize then at this point?
Okay.
So I believe if my scorecard's correct, then help me. At this point, the superintendent's recommendation would be to approve the CCPS recovery plan as submitted with the following revisions. To note that the volunteer program would not be reinstituted at the start of the year, to add the specific coding reference on student attendance, to add reference to the COVID testing process that would be in place, and to add reference to the additional supports for home and hospital and students in quarantine.
All right, do you all have that? Okay,
At this time, yes.
okay, at this time? Okay, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. And I did write a time down tonight for Dr. Locker.
Are we close?
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
And we're not done yet. All right, and thank you so much for the vote. And now, let's see here. We are at number, oh, yes. I need a motion for the approval of inpatient instructional specialist pay rate. So moved by Ms. Pataglia, seconded by
I'll second that.
Dr. Dorsey.
Okay, board members, I'll do a quick summary. This action item reflects a very positive partnership with Carroll Hospital Center, under which they provide funding for an inpatient instructional specialist. This individual coordinates some aspects of the work of home and hospital teachers, some aspects of it. Recently, the position was vacant, which caused us to review and update the partnership with legal counsel. This highlighted that the rate of pay under the agreement was not specifically listed on the rates of pay we brought for you for approval at the June meeting. Therefore, we wanted to bring the specific rate of pay for your approval this evening. In future years, it would be part of that June agenda.
Comments? Questions?
Um,
Yes, Dr. Dorsey?
Okay, so this is for the inpatient mental health, for students to get inpatient mental health treatment at the hospital center, right? I guess I'm sort of thinking back, are those like short-term stays until they get them placed in other hospitals, or?
There are a wide variety, Dr. Dorsey. It serves 2 purposes, and I'll say the names incorrectly. 1, because it's almost 11 o'clock, and 2, because there's an inpatient and a partial inpatient, but essentially there's two aspects at Carroll Hospital. There's long-term inpatient student, and then there's students coming and going that may be attending the homeschool for half a day and then going for support at the hospital, both of which contain an educational component that the hospital funds through their partnership with us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Now up for discussion is 9A, Guidelines for Family Life Advisory Committee. Dr. Locker.
Okay, board members, Mr. Anderson's prepared to share with you draft guidelines for your consideration and additional recommendations that you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Lockard. Board members, again, last winter, we virtually, we had received some recommendations from the board that the board would like to revisit the guidelines for the selection of the committee members for the Family Life Advisory Committee. And so what staff has done is taken into consideration that the board would like to appoint the members, and they've proposed a very high-level draft of a potential process, what that would look like. And I'm sure there's lots of feedback that we'll receive in regards to making this final. This is not a policy I was referenced earlier in comment. This is guidelines, but we want to make sure that we are able to illustrate that this is board-appointed per your recommendation and direction, as well as board has final vote, which we want to make sure is in here as well.
Okay, Ms. Pataglia, do you have any questions? Dr. Dorsey? We okay? Okay, Ms. Savigny.
And Mr. Anderson, thank you for this. I did have, this was in draft format.
Very much
right?
so.
And there were, I definitely had some concerns with some of the
Sure.
things that were in here. And I appreciate your final comment, because it seems like this was taking the voting out of the Board of Ed's hands and putting it into the committee. So the committee can vote to make recommendations
Correct.
to the board, but the board still
That's final vote.
has the final vote on what will and will not be included, right? So I want to make sure that that's very specifically stated in here.
Okay.
I also had some specific thoughts on the membership
Okay.
of this group.
Okay, great. We just gave a recommendation, again, of what we've seen in other places, but we're totally open to that.
Okay, because I think this committee was originally developed, right, to have parents opining on sensitive topics for their kids, right? And so I think this needs to be a significant number of parents that are on this group.
Okay.
I don't know that 7, one from each feeder pattern is really going to cover it.
Excuse me, and I would like to say something. We actually have 8 middle schools that feed in. So I would think you would have 8 members just from the middle school and not
Right.
from the 7 high schools. You're missing a whole school. So I would first say that we need 8
Well, I
for
was
that,
act-
just
I-
that part.
And I was actually going for something much larger than that, because the original committee it was similar to the curriculum committee, where there was a representative from each school, right, on the Family Life Committee. I'm not saying that we need to go that far, but I was thinking that you need several folks from each level, like from elementary school, middle school, and high school. So I was thinking that what might be more appropriate is, 10 elementary, 5 middle school, 5 high school, for a total of 20. And that, and we would also, similarly to what we're doing with the curriculum council, with the at-large members being appointed by the board, I would like to see that, each board member could appoint 1 member at large.
Okay.
And I'm putting these forth as suggestions, right? Because this is just a draft.
Yeah, I really like, Ms. Savigny, the idea of elementary school, because I know some of us have all been receiving emails of what was going on in classes, and it was very eye-opening on our part. So I'm glad you included elementary.
And I'd like to see that at least, you know, a minimum of 2/3 of those folks are parents that are not affiliated or employed by CCPS or the county. And I'd also like to see at least one member that's certified in risk avoidance philosophy, because we are an abstinence county, an abstinence state. Now that terminology has been updated to risk avoidance, but a lot of the things that are coming forth are under the other philosophy of risk reduction, right? And I'm not sure that there's a lot of understanding of the difference between the two. Like, I think things have gotten lost in the mix. So since we do still have an abstinence policy in this county, I would like to see at least one member that's certified in risk avoidance, who's a member. And I'd also like to see very, very strong transparency with this, right? So if the meetings if they're open to the public for the curriculum council, I'd also like to see something, at least discussion about something similar for this, and with minutes taken at those meetings and sent to all Board of Ed members.
Okay, so just for clarity there, if the actual committee was meeting, that public is welcome to come and sit and observe.
Right. And that's up for discussion, right? I mean, these are very sensitive topics, right? But I think that there may be some parents who would be, even though they may not be on the committee, they would like the opportunity to hear what's being discussed and how it's being discussed.
Correct.
So these are all going to be board appointed. So to give some insight, the way this has happened in other places is that we could put a link on our website. And because I heard loud and clear that folks want to be engaged and they want to participate, where they could go ahead and complete their application on our website. And that can go directly to you all. We can set up the query to identify, you know, which feeder they're in, elementary, middle, or high. All of the, you know, and you all would get those applications, and certainly staff could support you in the process, but you all would be selecting all those members.
What is meant by 2 at-large members?
Yeah, so that's what Ms. Savigny was just talking about. So in addition, so the reason why I think staff came up with 7, Ms. Herber, because there's 7 feeder high schools. And so in addition to that, they would have 2 additional members at large. That could be anywhere in our county. It doesn't have to be restricted to one feeder area. But that would just be appointed by the board, 2 additional members. What I heard Ms. Savigny say is she would like to have potentially another dozen or another 10 to 12. Is that what you were thinking?
Well, I was thinking, yeah, at least one per board member.
Okay.
So 5 more.
Okay,
That's after the.
okay. I just want to
I'm
make
sorry, I had my
sure
glasses
we
off.
were on the same
One
page.
board at large, got it.
Yep.
So did I hear that, are you saying we would be the ones actually appointing them? They would submit their applications to us as a board?
That's
And we
the
would-
discussion that we had sometime in virtual world, that the board was interested in making the appointments to this committee. And so I charged staff with looking at some other districts where that does take place. And so they came back with this recommendation of 17 voting members, 17 members. And so what I'm hearing now, the feedback is, can we increase the numbers? But yes, that's the direction that I was requested to take, is that the board would be appointing the members.
I'm not. I guess I was kind of envisioning it being similar to how we do the members from the other committees.
That's what I thought.
But that it would just be you know, each one of us, similar to what we were doing with the curriculum council, right? That it would be one member that could be appointed at large but we did say that we want to understand whether these folks are parents and whether they're affiliated
And that
with
can all be in
CC
the query when they complete it for their, lack of a formal term, application.
Okay. So I'm not sure. how other folks feel about that. Would there be like a Board of Ed site that you would go to
There would
apply,
actually,
but then you
Carrie
could
and I
give us the
briefly
breakdown of
talked
the
about
stats?
this. We would have a link on our website, again, promoting engagement of our community. Those interested in being on the Family Life Committee, please click here, and there would be a Microsoft form where they would complete it, and it would be compiled. We would be able to present that to you, and the board members could go through and look and identify the individuals that they think are most appropriate. We could have some questions in there. Why are you interested in being a part of this? Those types of things.
Okay, and then that would be something that would be reviewed and closed, right? Like people wouldn't want their
Sure, that would
personal
be your all's decision.
information. Right,
That's
right.
correct. That would be your all's decision, and then notification of those individuals would be made, and then it would be a formal vote on, here's the new guidelines, and by the way, here's the committee moving forward over the next year.
That would be an open,
That would be
just
open,
like
yes, yeah.
the
Just like you do
other,
over
the
the
prior, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We need to do something. I mean, and I think this is a step in the right direction.
And the last thing that I would ask for is, like topics, a list of topics that would be discussed, similar to what we did for all of the other committees. Right.
Absolutely. So if it's okay with the board, when we return, we'll start working on putting all this together, this process. And what I'd like to do is have the guidelines revised, bring back to you for action for approval, and the process approved also within the guidelines. And then we can start taking action in regards to posting the application between September and October. Hopefully by close in October, we could have a selection done of those that are qualified, most qualified, the board feels most qualified. And then we could probably start moving forward with this, late October, if not early November. Okay. And we can put the topics on the cover page on topics of discussion this year.
Any other comments? Questions? Well, thank you for all your input.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, unfinished business, new business? No one's like,
It's late.
yeah, it's like, no one.
Just wanted to bring up the question about the draft policy that we made the motion at last meeting. If we could give an update on where that stands and how we'll be moving that forward.
Be happy to. Ms. McKay, Mr. O'Mealy, and I are going to be coming to a work session to the board in September. We're going to, that'll be following our joint meeting with the commissioners on the 23rd. We're going to meet with the board to discuss what currently exists in policy and regulation, provide some recommendations based on the board's directive, and then take the opportunity to get any additional feedback and direction from the board that evening so that we can turn that around and bring it back for policy adoption at a future Board of Education meeting.
Okay,
And Ms. Herbert, the last one, I guess I would say is, just so that we don't lose the muscle memory, ask about topics for CAC.
right. Anything else? Ms.
I think I'll
Patella?
probably just get some feeders, like I can post something on, my Board of Ed Facebook page, like what are some things you would like to see your school's member talk about or think about, and I can always bring something like that back. See what the community says.
Okay, because the first meeting's not until after our next board meeting, right?
Early October.
Early
Yeah.
October, okay.
All right, so I can see what I can get.
Anything else for the good of the order? All right, at 5 p.m., Wednesday, September 8th, 2021, board meeting with citizen participation in the boardroom at 125 North Court Street, Westminster. Then at 3:30 p.m. Thursday, September 23rd, 2021, Board of Education and Board of County Commissioner joint meeting, and it will be over at the conference room 003 at the county office building.
Followed by a
Yeah,
work session.
then, yes, and then we will come back over to this room, and we will have a work session. Anything else?
That we will be resuming our closed meeting.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yes, yeah, yes. You all get to leave, we get to go back, and my number I wrote down was 11:30 to Dr. Lockhart, so it will be past that, I guarantee. So, thank you, and now I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
By Dr. Dorsey, seconded by Ms. Battaglia. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously, and thank you. I'm so sorry it went so late. And now we go back into close for some of us.